Okay, good afternoon to everybody. First of all, I would like to welcome Martin Schmalzried, who is the author of this book. La Terre accouche, histoire d'une humanité en gestation. So it's Mother Earth Final Push, the story of humanity's gestation. And I'm very glad to have Martin with us today, and this is a book presentation during this pre-conference, which is the EMANES Euro-Mediterranean African Network for Economic Studies Annual Conference of this year, and practically it is starting today and officially is tomorrow and after tomorrow. Of course, this conference is very timely because, first of all, it is about new economic models for the Europe, Mediterranean, and Africa. And at the same time, this year, we are focusing on the pillars for social inclusion. And I think we see clearly that because of the, I would say, the challenges that our economies and societies are facing, not only from of course, the post-COVID-19, but also the war in Ukraine and increasing inflation, increasing indebtedness, and at the same time, all the climatic challenges that we have been discussing also at the COP27. I think this is important to think of different ways in reality to think about our economic models, particularly in countries that are developing countries, low and middle income countries. So today is really very timely, and I thank very much again Martin. Let me present Martin. First of all, I know Martin since many years. Martin, I think it's more than 10 years now when we met at the FSUG. FSUG is Financial Services User Group, who is a group set to discuss issues related to the usage of financial services in Europe. But beyond that, we also work together for the European Banking Authority stakeholder group. And then this group is trying really to think about the future of regulation and trying to give advice to regulatory aspect standards for the European Union. Martin is also an academic. He's a lecturer, writing and also speaking about major challenges of our humanity from a different perspective, from really a transformative perspective. And this book is also a reflection of these thoughts about how humanity is really moving over the last years, and probably even offering some opportunities and some new ideas for a transformative scenario that we are very much interested in. Martin, he is a political scientist by training, and this is also gives him a very interesting view on how the humanity, from an economic and also from a societal point of view, is going forward. So, Martin, thank you very much for accepting our invitation at the pre-conference event of EMANES this year. And you have 35 minutes to share with us this great, I would say, assessment of the work you have done over the years. And you and I have discussed very much during our lunch breaks in Brussels, I remember very well. And I'm extremely happy that this project of yours, this personal project of yours has come through. And please, the floor and the screen is yours.
Great. So I just wanted to check that you can see the presentation and see me as well. Yeah. Oh, good.
We don't see you, but we see you.
Okay, but you see the presentation. All right. Well, it's fine. So you just hear my voice. All right. So first of all, well, thanks a lot for your invitation. This is a great opportunity. Welcome to this book launch. And today I'll be presenting a book I've written, which is entitled Mother's Final Push, The Story of Humanity's Gestation. It's available in English since this November, so it's a very recent publication. The French version was available a few months back. So the main argument of the book relies on biomimicries, or drawing inspiration from nature. Now, this is common practice in many fields, and you have some concrete examples on the slide. So for instance, Velcro, the shape of an airplane's wings, or a high-speed bullet train all draw inspiration from nature's design. Now, more specifically, my book is about leveraging our inner wisdom or the workings of our own bodies. How can we inspire ourselves from the functioning of our own body to help address key societal questions like inclusion, inequality, poverty, resolving conflicts, and so forth? So throughout this presentation, I start off with the premise that each human is like a cell, basically, inside a collective global organism that we call humanity. And then drawing parallels between the human body, our experience in that body growing up, and humanity's own development as a sort of a global collective organism. Now, the picture on the right, in the picture on the right, you have the Leviathan, which is a sort of a fictional entity made up by the British political thinker Thomas Hobbes. So this entity kind of emerged via a so-called social contract that each individual agreed to, deferring to this entity his or her ability to protect oneself using violence. So you're deferring your right to violence to this kind of entity or being. And the idea was that a collective entity would be able to better protect individuals. So this Leviathan was thus a kind of entity which held a power which was the sum of each individual wielding it as a coherent whole. And that sort of idea sort of cemented the nation states ideas with armies, police force, judicial systems, and all the institutions that sprung from that. And it reflects one of the many stages of development of humanity in forming a collective global organism. So we'll play a little guessing game. I'll describe some part of the human body or some experiences that we have had at our human level. And then you can guess what it corresponds to at the level of humanity. And I actually can't see the chat, so you can just like unmute your mic and just answer. That'll be easiest. So let's start with the first one. So imagine if humanity is a global collective organism, what would be the equivalent to our circulatory system at the scale of humanity? Anyone has any ideas?
Roads?
Nope.
Air?
So the circulatory system is in charge of distributing energy to the body.
Yeah. So electric, maybe air.
Yeah, that partly, yeah. Well, actually, it's the financial system, if you think about it. Money is kind of our oxygen at the human level. So you could view money as a form of oxygen because it's vital for humans. In most countries on this planet, you need money in order to access food, shelter, all your basic necessities of life. And then you can convert money into, buying electricity, buying food, buying all kinds of things. So next, if humanity is a global collective organism, what would be its nervous system? Now that one's really easy.
Government.
What would you guess?
Governments?
Governments? Not really. Just think about communications. Like the nervous system is about communication. It's sending commands to the body.
Sending commands to humanity.
So imagine humanity is one collective global organism. We're all cells in that body. And what would be our nervous system? The equivalent? Okay, it's the internet, basically. The internet is a series of cables that run around the world that connect every human being, right? So it's kind of like our nervous system. So now hang on tight, because this one is a more difficult one. So if humanity is a global collective organism, what would be the equivalent of the relationship of the placenta to the baby, so some kind of outside organ to the global organism, or the relationship, which is kind of mirrored also by the relationship of the parents to a child? So again, if the baby and the child represent humanity as an organism, what form does the placenta or parents take at the level of humanity? And I've actually heard the answer before, so.
Nature. It's the nature, I think, but
nature, that's kind of too macro, something closer to us. Okay, it's actually governments. So think about this. The placenta is a centralized organ which serves as an intermediary between the mother's resources and the baby. The parents are a centralized authority figure which serve as an intermediary between the society's resources and the child. And so a child has to go through his or her parents to access societal resources. He cannot do it on his own. And then humanity, or a society as a collective, has to go through governments which are, again, a centralized kind of authority or organ, which serve as an intermediary between the planet's resources and society. Whenever you want to exploit the land, build a house, access the planet's resources, you have to apply for permits, respect national laws, hold property titles, enforced by the state or these kind of centralized institutions. Now, this last example will be very important because just as you as an organism has grown in your relationship to your parents, so too humanity or our societies have evolved in their relationship to their governments. And this is what I'll view in the next few slides. So again, let's continue this little game. Put yourself in the shoes of a baby. How does it perceive reality and his parents? And now apply that same pattern to a tribe of humans some 20,000 years ago. How does such a tribe view reality? Anyone?
Blurry.
Blurry, yeah, that's in the beginning, you're kind of blind. But then basically you view reality as something magical, mystical, weird, you don't understand. I mean, a baby looking at his parents, you're basically from a baby's perspective, you're a magician. You can manipulate objects, you can like pick him up, do whatever you want with it. It's just like completely fascinated and doesn't understand much of what's going on. And the same applies to tribes 20,000 years ago, basically, or groups of humans or humanity as a global maturing organism. They also viewed reality as some kind of thing that is really magical, mystical, with all kinds of different gods, deities, and all that stuff. Spirits of nature, you have the shaman, tribal chief. And then, again, we have an evolution. The organism grows and develops, and now you're in the shoes of a 5-year-old child. So how does that child perceive reality and his parents? And try to mirror that evolution to the evolution of humanity as a society, as a global organism, to, you could say, some kind of external authority, governments, or whatever, or reality. Any ideas?
Powerful and something that dominates you.
And
Yeah. Yeah.
But you want to defy it.
I don't know.
Your testing is limit.
Yeah, so basically it's all your monarchies of divine right, you know, kings and queens, and it's also monotheism and anthropomorphized gods, you know, like the bearded man in the sky kind of idea. So 1,000 years ago, you could clearly see that the people as a society could clearly see that the king was not so different from them. I mean, they had a human body. They went to the toilet much in the same way as they did. The king walked also the way they did, but his powers were completely disproportionate compared to that of the people. So a king could snap a finger and you could be killed on the spot by his royal guard. Also, most people had a deep admiration for their king, much like a 5-year-old admires his parents. And like for a child, it's the same. Like from a child's perspective, he can see that he can walk like his parents. He can also pretty much talk like them, but his rights and powers are totally unequal to that of his parents. And so that like a society as a collective now projects that same kind of, you know, experience towards an outward manifested kind of authority figure. And then this was one of my favorites. You have, of course, like, again, you evolve as an organism, then you reach the stage of a teenager. So how does a teenager perceive his parents? And then what kind of institutions will be created by humanity as humanity becomes kind of a teenager globally?
Outdated. No, outdated maybe.
What's that?
Like you perceive them as outdated institutions.
Outdated, yeah. But I mean, like, what kind of institutions are they?
They're still the government, no?
Oh yeah, they're still the government, but they're no longer kings. So what are they at that point?
The parliament.
And not
Yeah, are representative democracies, basically. So basically a teenager desacralizes his parents, which is what we've done with, you know, God and all that stuff and kings. So teenagers don't admire their parents anymore. You know, their parents are no longer gods or kings in their eyes. You know, God is dead, you know, to quote Nietzsche. So let's examine the pattern then. So teenagers, first of all, love to criticize their parents, to list all of their faults. Now, if you look at citizens in most democratic governments, they also love to criticize their elected officials. They jump on any occasion to point to corruption, fraud, manipulation, you know, like the saying, like, oh, they're all the same, these politicians, blah, blah, blah. Then teenagers also engage in a power struggle against their parents' authority to acquire more autonomy, freedom, and rights. So they want to have the right to come home later in the evening, to choose their own clothes. And a human society will do the same. It will hold protests and organize strikes to obtain more rights, societal, social, political, economic, and so on. Human rights, freedom of speech. And then finally, while a teenager loves to criticize his parents, he really doesn't want to take that much responsibility. So that's really typical as well. So when governments throw up their hands and say, well, sorry, we're out of ideas, we need your help, we cannot solve these, and you have problem like governments that fail or whatever, in most cases, citizens will say, hey, I've got my own personal problems to take care with. I have to, tend to my own garden and do my own stuff. I'm paying taxes. It's your job to fix these problems, not mine. So that's classical. And then finally, there always comes a time when a teenager grows into a young adult and leaves the parental nest. And how does that translate at our level of reality? Any ideas?
Manifesting protest.
No, protests would still be the teenager's stage.
Living abroad.
Living abroad, I mean, don't forget, this is humanity as a collective global organism that is sort of taking its independence from the parents, which are symbolized as take the form of governments, centralized governments, that is. Okay, I won't torture you too much. It's blockchain technology and all the premises and the seeds of self-governance, decentralized decision-making. Like blockchain basically is just like it's like the sign that the teenager is starting to think about living on his own. But it's because it's about reclaiming your financial freedom, basically, from this kind of centralized fiat money. It's about making decentralized decision-making processes, finding tools to do that. And some of you may laugh at this point and say, point to all the scandals and frauds and problems in the crypto space, latest of which the FTX scandal, that the entire crypto industry is just a giant Ponzi scheme and that it'll all go to zero. But how many of you have had children that turned into young adults and moved in with other young adults in a shared apartment or dorm? Any of you have, children that are at that age? Yeah, right. So in most cases, what you'll find is total chaos, right? You'll have overflowing garbage cans, unwashed dishes, leftovers of rotten food, mismanagement of money where they spend like there's no tomorrow on payday and then eat frozen lasagnas for the rest of the month. Sometimes going as far as like setting their apartment on fire due to gross negligence, And at the same time, these experiences are formative because at some point they will enable these young adults to grow into fully fledged autonomous individuals that no longer rely on their parents. And you see that exact same pattern repeats with the crypto space, where you can clearly see the overflowing garbage cans and burning apartments. And yet you also see the premises of revolutionary systems hinting at the potential for self-governance and this independence from centralized authorities or bodies of governance like our governments. And obviously these transitions from baby humanity to child humanity to teenager humanity to humanity as a young adult in terms of the global collective organism that we represent, that can happen in many ways. It can happen in a smooth way, like in Britain, where there was a gradual transition from monarchy to parliamentary democracy, or in violent ways like the French Revolution, where you have it's almost like a teenager when he's like 14, thinking he's going to, change the whole world, run away from his parents, does crazy stuff, and then comes back home and says, "Ooh, I'm sorry, I messed up." That's kind of the history of the French Revolution, because, after the revolution, they came back to royalty and monarchy for, half a century or so. And finally, I'll end with a very important experience, which is universal to all humans and which concerns us all at this time, the cutting of our own umbilical cord after birth. Now, what does that experience translate into if you look at humanity as a global collective organism? That should be easy by now. Not a guess? All right, I'll help you. It's the energy transition, basically, from fossil fuels to green or sustainable or renewable energies. You call them what you want. But If you really think about it, the moment where you cut the umbilical cord is the moment where a baby transitions from an unsustainable and non-renewable energy source to a sustainable and renewable one. So towards the end of pregnancy, a baby grows to such an extent that it can draw more resources than his mother can renew. And many women can experience deficiencies in proteins, minerals, vitamins, all that stuff. And switching from feeding off of our mother's blood, which symbolically can take the form of oil if you want in our case, which is the kind of like the blood of this planet, if you think about it, to breathing with our own lungs is the most radical energy transition that we've all been through. The air we breathe right now is an infinite source of clean energy from the point of view of our organisms, our bodies. So let's now focus on one specific source of inner wisdom and how we can transpose it to our level of reality, the way our body distributes energy to its various parts. Here, I'll leverage two different quotes by two radically different political and economic thinkers. So the first quote reads, "From each according to his ability to each according to his needs." Now, who wrote that? That's an easy one. No? That was Karl Marx. It basically encapsulates his idea of communism. So if you think about it, this very accurately describes how your own bodies work. I mean, each cell receives what it needs depending on its ability. I mean, your skin cells play the role of skin cells and receive the energy they need to do what they're supposed to do. And then also what you, the body, is doing, if you're digesting, resting, running. Now a quote from another very famous thinker. So the rich are led by an invisible hand to make nearly the same distribution of the necessaries of life, which would have been made had the earth been divided into equal portions among all its inhabitants, and thus without intending it, without knowing it, advance the interest of the society and afford means to the multiplication of the species. Now, maybe that's more familiar to you. Do you know who wrote that?
Smith.
Yes, Adam Smith. And again, so this quote is a bit more complex and lengthy, but it also describes how your own body works. So if you think about it in your bodies, who's the big boss that decides how much energy your various body parts should receive? Rather, it seems that there's a kind of magical intelligence that distributes energy exactly as necessary through the body, as if guided by an invisible hand. Now, the issue with Karl Marx was that communism was applied by a centralized authority who saw fit to determine what the ability of people should be, so how many engineers or doctors should be trained, and also determine who deserves what, so what the needs of the people should be, losing this kinds of spontaneous, decentralized, magical intelligence. And the issue with Adam Smith is that the invisible hand only works in an environment where each cell is considered as part of the whole, and not where people are treated as dispensable cogs in a machine that can go die under a bridge when there's no need for their labor or service anymore. So let's look at our current financial economic system and draw some parallels between the way humanity developed on this planet with the development of a baby still inside the womb. So the way it works now is monetary mass has to grow at the same pace as the total availability of goods and services. There has to be growth in order to service interest on debt. The whole system relies on a rollover of credit into infinity. So new debts are used to repay old debts, and you just repeat that process into infinity. And there's this, it just all manifests as this exponential expansion, which mirrors the growth of a fetus inside the womb. So you can see like the graph of world GDP or US money supply or human population. You can see that it all just basically goes exponential, especially from the moment we have adopted a debt-based monetary system with interest and all these kind of things. Now, let's be a little bit more specific and look at how money works and answer the key question of what is money. Now, you've all heard the textbook boring definition of money, which says that money is a medium of exchange, a unit of account, and a store of value. Now, to me, that says absolutely nothing about what money is. It's rather describing some of its characteristics, but without actually defining what it is. It's like saying a car has wheels, seats, and a steering wheel, but failing to say that it's a means of transportation. So what is money, according to me, in this current debt-based monetary system? Money is the formalization of a social debt translated into abstract numeric values issued by a bank, which has the right to enforce the execution of the debt. So let's pick that definition apart. Ultimately, anyone can really create money. If I need help because I'm moving out from my home, and my friend comes to help me for 3 hours, there's a kind of informal social debt that has been created between us. I could decide to formalize it and give it a little paper to my friend saying, I owe you 3 hours of my time. Now that piece of paper is ultimately the same as a 50-euro bill with a few minor differences. Firstly, my friend cannot go to the hairdresser and trade that voucher for a haircut, since the hairdresser doesn't know me and therefore doesn't trust that the trade is worth it or that I will honor my promise. Second, the piece of paper isn't linked to a repayment schedule or interest. Third, if I suddenly decide that I don't like my friend anymore and that I won't honor my debt, there is no authority which will force me to make good on my promise. And finally, fourth, the voucher I created is based on time as a currency, as opposed to fiat money, which deals in abstract numeric values. So in essence, commercial banks are institutions that are entitled to emit universally accepted vouchers of social debt. And the state give those banks the right to force people to honor their promises. So they can come and take the property of your car away or your house away and sell it into the market so that they recoup your social promise that you didn't deliver on. So the value of money, its store of value, is therefore linked directly to the seriousness and reliability of the people in honoring their promises, and especially in finding ways to grow the economy to match the level of interest on debt. So if tomorrow people decided that they didn't want to repay their debts anymore, money would become as worthless as the voucher that I gave to my friend. Also, one has to realize that the speed at which the economy runs is heavily influenced by the repayment of debt. People can decide to consume less, defer the purchase of a good, but they can't arbitrarily decide that this month they want to repay a little less on their loan repayments. And that is essentially what artificially gives a stable rhythm to an economy on top of other fixed expenditures like salaries and rent. And then everything else is designed in our economy to match that artificial rhythm via advertising or creating a steady, to create steady and recurring income streams for companies. Because obviously companies have these kinds of recurring expenditures. And so that has to be mirrored by the way that we consume. So you can see that from that moment, for the moment, centralized governments, commercial banks, and loans with interest, from the moment all that came into existence, we've experienced exponential growth. And that pretty much mirrors the development of a baby inside the womb. So long as the baby is inside, his body grows and expands exponentially at a steady pace, and the energy inflow is stable and continuous. But nowadays, many economists are underlining the incompatibility between exponential growth and a world with finite resources. And so the question is, how can we move beyond a debt-based monetary system and at the same time achieve certain key policy objectives like inclusion, equity, justice, social welfare, and so on? So to this end, I'll present to you the relative theory of money by Stéphane Laborde, which is a French economist, which completely redefines what money is and how it functions. The relative theory of money essentially views money as a form of voting mechanism to determine what has value and what doesn't. Whenever you spend money at the baker, for instance, what you're doing in a way is voting for the endured existence for that baker's business. You could say it's almost like a demand pool mechanism. The relative theory of money, or RTM, underlines that every human is inherently equal when it comes to assessing what has value and what doesn't. Every single human has different needs and different priorities, and no single human holds a form of universal wisdom which should allow him or her to determine what the economy should look like. This translates in the RTM as an equal right of each individual to determine what has value and what doesn't equally across time, meaning that each generation has an equal voting weight in determining what has value. So it's their relative control of the monetary mass, every day and through time. It's kind of like trying to recreate the principle of the wisdom of the crowd. I won't explain what that is now, but I mean, if you want, I'll explain it later. The RTM addresses a key major concern in monetary policy, which is securing price stability and ensuring that money becomes a stable measuring stick. So nowadays, the stability of money as a measuring stick relies on the synchronous fluctuation between the monetary mass on the one hand and the total availability of goods and services on the other. But that's a very delicate balance to keep. And so money as a measuring stick isn't very effective as the stick keeps expanding and shrinking, depending on, what, central banks do and all that stuff. Now, to address this problem, the RTM leverages the principle of relativity. In order to measure anything in the universe, one needs to find a measuring stick which is constant, and then all other things can fluctuate around such a constant. Now, in Einstein's principle of relativity, that constant is the speed of light. Don't be scared. I'll go through these as I'm speaking. So with the RTM, what the relative theory of money is doing is that it simply takes the current monetary mass, it looks at its annual growth, which is around 10% in the Eurozone, and then it divides up that extra addition of fresh money and distributes it symmetrically across all individuals inside an economy on a daily basis. And that includes even babies. So in the Eurozone, that would amount to around 10 euros per person per day. And this amount is then called a universal dividend. Now, in the RTM, there's no more monetary destruction, like when you repay a loan. Basically, when you create a loan, there's a creation of money. When you repay a loan, it's a destruction of money. So money leaves the economy. Here, money constantly circulates in the economy. Money is created ex nihilo and is not a debt. It's this idea of using money as a voting mechanism. Each day, every single citizen has a new opportunity to vote by spending his universal dividend for the goods and services he or she thinks have value. And that's like transforming the entire economy into a giant permanent crowdfunding. Now, in the tables that you have on the left, you have two different tables, basically. One that's measuring things in an absolute terms or in individual units of currency, and the other which counts in universal dividends or in relative terms. So on the left, you have an economy with 3 individuals and zero-sum exchanges. So basically, they just, whatever you pay someone, somebody else pays you back. So, it's almost like they have a stable kind of income. The first individual has 1,000 units of currency. That's like P1, you see on the first column, 1,000. The second has 2,000, and the third has 3,000. The total monetary mass is 6,000 units of currency. On the first year, each person receives 200 units of freshly created universal dividend money. And you can see that year over year, the universal dividend increases by 10%, and the amount of currency in the economy grows exponentially. Now, in such a scenario, most economists would see inflation reaching insane levels since money circulates forever in the economy and never leaves. Now, on the right, you have the exact same economy with 3 individuals, zero-sum exchanges, except now you're counting using universal dividends as your point of reference. So if everyone receives the same universal dividend, you can also count or assess the value of things using a universal dividend as a measuring stick. So in essence, instead of saying that a computer costs 1,000 units of currency, you could also say it costs 5 universal dividends, since 1 universal dividend on year 1 equals 200 units of currency. Now, if you look at that table, the first individual starts off with 5 UD, or universal dividends, the second with 10, and the third with 15. The monetary mass is 30 UD, and each year the amount of individual units of currency is increased by 10%. But since you're using the UD as a frame of reference, your monetary mass stays the same because you constantly divide the monetary mass by the new value of the universal dividend. However, the relative share of the total monetary mass controlled by each individual changes. So the effect that the RTM has over time is that every single individual is pulled towards a mean or an equalization of the total amount of wealth one has compared to another. So it's a form of a melting currency, but with a very interesting property. It naturally equalizes wealth without the need for taxation as a redistribution mechanism. Now we can view such an effect visually in the following graph, where over time, the relative share of the total monetary mass that individuals control goes towards the mean. Here you have 5 individuals in an economy, and you can see that as time goes by, everybody's sort of pooled towards all having 10 as an amount that they have in terms of the money or the universal dividends that they hold. Now, what's really interesting is when you compare such a system to the way that our own bodies distribute energy. On the left-hand side, you have a graph which maps oxygen consumption to the body during exercise and rest. And on the right-hand side, you have a graph where you still have the same 5 individuals as in the previous graph, but now you introduce economic exchanges where one person spends money and somebody else receives it. You can see a very similar phenomenon at play. So whenever you pay someone, it's as if that person temporarily has a higher level of oxygen or money consumption. And then if there's no more exchanges happening, the level of money or oxygen one has normalizes back towards the mean. And it works in exactly the same way in our bodies. If you run, energy flows naturally to your legs. When you sit down to listen to a Zoom conference, energy rushes to your brain. Right now, as you're listening to me and you're breathing in and breathing out, every single one of your cells is receiving a kind of universal dividend or a share of the total monetary mass creation or oxygen that you draw out of thin air. And then it is distributed inside the body depending on the needs. In the RTM, it is the individual decisions of millions of people in an economy daily that determines where money will concentrate and thus how the economy will grow. And while in a debt-based monetary system, money is destroyed to match the destruction of goods and services via the repayment of a loan, in the RTM, money is rather periodically debased in the same way as your legs, who receive less and less oxygen if you stop running and their level of consumption of oxygen normalizes. In our current monetary system, essentially, it's as if you were still under census suffrage, or a kind of democracy where certain people, like the rich or the aristocrats under census suffrage, had all the votes. In a debt-based monetary system, three actors have a disproportionate influence on what the economy looks like. Commercial banks, via their decision to lend or not to someone, which determines at the outset what goods and services will be available in the economy to purchase, and which people will be able to pick from. Then you have governments, obviously, that distort also all this, what's available in the economy. And then finally, you have the ultra rich, which also influence what goods and services are available more than other people. If you view humanity as a global collective organism, then whenever money concentrates, it allows to transform reality in a certain way or move the collective body of humanity in a certain direction. So a few centuries ago, when the church held most of the money, it moved society or the cells of humanity as a global collective organism to build cathedrals. Nowadays, when a billionaire like Elon Musk controls a lot of money, it allows him to put humanity into motion to send a sports car into space, for instance. So in practice, the relative theory of money has been used to create a cryptocurrency called the June or G1. And Duniter, you can find more information on duniter.org. And there are many effects linked to a monetary system based on the RTM, but amongst the most important that I want to list here is that you can go beyond growth. So growth is no longer required. The economy can basically fluctuate, expand, and contract more naturally. You have an equal vote. The economy will reflect more accurately the sum total of each individual decisions to buy a certain good or service. And then you have symmetry in access to money. So many monetary problems are due to an asymmetry of money creation. Who gets to the freshly created money first? As is the case in inflation, for instance, where people that get to the money first are advantaged compared to those who get to the money later. Now, I'm sure you've all seen this graph, which represents what most post-growth economists are calling for, a kind of S-curve where the GDP plateaus, moving away from the exponential growth logic. Except that this is very difficult to achieve under a debt-based monetary system. Now, let's go back to nature's wisdom. These two graphs represent, in the lower left, the growth of a baby inside the womb, and in the upper right, the growth of a baby once outside the womb. So can you see the pattern? Do you see the S-curve? So every single human has gone through this universal experience of, you know, as a growing exponentially as a global collective organism while inside its mother's womb, and then the growth rate sort of slows down radically after birth. So when I'm saying birthing a new economic and financial system, I mean it quite literally, in fact. So as I've already pointed out in the very beginning of my presentation, we have never really left biomimicry. This is also the thesis at the center of my book. So as humans, we've just recreated in our outer reality a wisdom that was contained within each and every human from the start. We've recreated our nervous system, which takes the form of the internet. We have recreated our circulatory system, which takes the form of the financial system. Looking at commercial banks, governments, and big multinational energy companies, all of these entities basically represent a kind of placenta or an organ which serves as the intermediary between this planet's resources and individual humans. But while these institutions have a role to play in order to grow humanity as a global collective organism to a point where all of our organs or countries are mature and developed enough to function as a collective in a harmonious way, at a certain point, the role of the placenta comes to an end, and then the lungs and stomach take over. So, I mean, just a few days ago, I saw a news article which says that we've made huge advances in nuclear fusion. I mean, it doesn't really matter what form or what kind of energy system or technology replaces oil. It's the logic that's really most important here. It's this trend, this pattern of separating from these centralized institutions and having access to more freely available and quote unquote infinite energy. So what we need is a resilient financial system which can weather shocks and sudden changes, much like what happens to a baby after birth, where it's no longer in a stable and controlled environment. And for that, the RTM is the perfect choice since it doesn't rely on centralized institutions to control and pilot everything, but it distributes money to each individual equally to create a form of wisdom of the crowd effect, birthing a collective decentralized intelligence, much like that of our own bodies. And obviously, there are many more things to talk about, like how to handle and transition from one system to another, or imagine hybrid systems where debt is still used for financing mega projects or long-term investments like a mortgage. But I won't have the time to cover all these considerations here. Now, in my book, I go much further and discuss plenty of these other links between our inner experience and our bodies and our outer experience, such as the internet, artificial intelligence, energy, politics, and I also look at key challenges and issues such as climate change, the coronavirus, the war between Russia and Ukraine, and how viewing humanity as a collective global organism can help address these challenges. So you'll find my book on Amazon. It's available as paperback and ebook for Kindle. You can also visit my website, humanity.life, where I provide my services as a speaker on these various topics I address in my book. So thanks a lot for your attention. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask. And that'll be all from me.
Thank you,
There we go.
Martin. That was very stimulating. I remember when I started reading this book, I started saying that human body is already extremely complex. It took us probably centuries to understand part of it. The financial system is also growing extremely complex. So joining complexity most probably is one element that link both eventually if they are linked. I mean, I tend to think otherwise, but again, it's very stimulating, as I mentioned, very thought-provoking, and I in fact enjoyed reading it because at each page I had question marks to make me think about what really drives humanities at the end of the day, most probably. And I don't want to think that humanity is driven simply by money, and I tend not to think like this. So, and I prefer to continue not thinking like this. So anyway, thank you again for this very thought-provoking presentation. And I would like, I asked, in fact, to my friend and colleague, Giovanni Perry, who is a professor of economics. And then he is also very much, interested in topics related to money, banking, and we work a lot on those aspects too. Giovanni has been moving, also working on sustainability, on well-being, and we're also trying to develop new thinking and new modes of thinking for our economic models. He is the director of the Master of Management of Sustainable Development at the LUMSA University, and he himself received his PhD in New York University. So, Giovanni, please, the floor is yours to discuss this presentation of Martin. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rym. Thank you for inviting me. It's a big pleasure to be discussing this book by Martin, Mother Earth's Final Push. I found reading the book really interesting, and the three what the book is about perspires from the Martin's presentation, but there is much more, as he said. And what I would use as I would use three specific expressions to describe what I felt by reading this book. I thought it was refreshing, and I will elaborate on that. I thought it was intriguing, and I will spend a few words on that. And I thought it is challenging, and I will also elaborate on that. The first observation, it is refreshing. It is refreshing because we have, I mean, we are experiencing a discussion arena, policy discussion arena, which is always a little bit old style. We tend to frame discussions on particularly economic policy discussions in terms of liberal versus and therefore conservative versus progressive actions. But I think that the world we are living in is rapidly changing, and we need to move out of the box, to jump out of the box. So the representation that Martin is suggesting us, is proposing us to consider again the individuals as part of a total body, which is humanity, and humanity living on planet Earth. This is something which is not entirely new, but it is certainly refreshing, because he's trying to jump out of the box of predefined frameworks, and he's trying to provide new frameworks that are using some if you wish, also technical knowledge from here and there, putting together, mixing it in a different way. And the result is good. The result is providing a new approach to look at the whole system. The second word I used is intriguing. I found reading the book intriguing. And this again goes back to this being part of a whole. We normally read lots of books that are looking at very specific micro aspects of knowledge. And indeed, science has been ever since the age of enlightenment, science has progressively become more specialized. So it is as if science was only vertical, as if we were putting the spotlight on something specific. So today I am a microbiologist, but I only deal with a very specific subsection of microbiology. And there is another microbiologist in the next room who has the same background like me, but she has been devoting her entire life to something that is totally meaningless for me, and we cannot talk to each other. So I'm alone in my little cell, scientific cell in my lab, and I'm trying to make science progress science, but I have no way to confront with anybody else who knows enough, or maybe there are very few people whom I can talk to. So this is a vertical specialization, but the vertical specialization of science is, if you wish, a paradigm of what is going wrong, that we need scientific specialization to make progress, scientific progress, but at the same time, we need to also have the horizontal dimension of knowledge, which is putting the different types of fields of specialization in touch with each other. So it is as if we were missing a dimension. And the idea that Martin is bringing of representing the world we live in, the humanity on planet Earth we live in, as a flow, as a unique, and being part of a whole, is going exactly in that direction. It is in a sense a step which is needed if we want science to become useful again, if we want knowledge to become useful and not only self-referential. And at the same time, this brings in the issue that Rym was also mentioning of well-being. We need to not only be able to produce material goods and services, as we have been engaged in doing since the first industrial revolution. Now it's time to look at prosperity instead of looking at progress in terms of economic development, material development. Material development is difficult. It is going to be increasingly difficult in the future, even though it is possible to do some of it. But prosperity is something else. It tells you that people need to be happy, need to be satisfied. And in order to make humans satisfied, you need to give humans not only the richness of the ownership of material goods, as we used to think a few decades ago. You need to give, first of all, humans and individuals a sense of life. What is our life about? And if you give people a sense of life, they will feel satisfied, even though they will not have access to increasing flows of material goods, the ownership of material goods. So this is about intriguing. But then we come to the third word, which is challenging. How do we manage that? And the book has something to say also about that. And Martin was also clear in his presentation. There is a plan to make that happen, make that evolution happen, of adapting and empowering the people in order to support this transformation that he is proposing. And what is the adaptation? The adaptation comes through the empowering in terms of what he calls the dividend, so the common dividend, if I'm not wrong. So giving people some monetary amount to spend the way to cast their vote. And here is a big challenge in the sense that it is fantastic. We have been discussing about consumers voting with their wallets already. This is something we teach in our management courses in sustainability. We have been talking about people voting with their savings. I mean, sustainable finance, if it is truly sustainable, is about that. I'm not sure that the ESG investment in environmental social governance, which has been thriving in over the last few years, is exactly all of that. There is much of greenwashing and social washing and governance washing, if you wish, but at least it is trying to go into that direction. But what Martin adds to that is not only that people should be able to vote with what they have, but it should be a public policy to provide an endowment, additional endowment to them in order to become transformative. And this is the real challenge. I don't know whether this is politically feasible, but if that would prove to be feasible on a political ground, and here I'm not the expert, maybe Martin knows more than me, given his political science background, I would be really hopeful that this would be the true game changer. So, and adapting, helping people to, empowering people to get adapting, and those policies could be empowered exactly with providing this endowment of ability to spend towards the transformative approach that we need in order to make society and make humanity on planet Earth feel like one and plan for survival, because we are talking about that. We have entered, according to the historians of geological ages, into Anthropocene a few decades ago, maybe 100 years ago. And to use another Greek word, anthropos is for humans. And to use another Greek word, we are at risk of ending over from Anthropocene to Mustacene, which is the era of the mosquito. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Giovanni. I think this gives a very nice overview on the three dimensions that you focused on when reading or when listening to the presentation of Martin. You also made me think of the new, or I would say the concepts of flourishing, human flourishing, which in reality could be taken as a new concepts for humanity or human development, take into account what I call the concept of creativity as well. I mean, of course, we would, if we start drawing the parallels between from one body to another, which was really very, very thought-provoking. I was already thinking that our energy should be beyond really the survival in terms of the monetary value of what we do, what we don't do. We need to go beyond and develop a flourishing type of thinking that allow us or to drive us into what I call the transformative scenario that we want to achieve. But of course, these are thinking, as Giovanni said, outside the box, and probably thinking outside the box might be interesting from a theoretical standpoint. But then when you implement them and execute them, you might fall into the, what I call the trend, the reference model, where everybody would like to move into the least common denominator, I would say the lowest value. So of course, money is tangible. Of course, it helps some sort of trading between things and so on. But then of course, this is the system we have been, we are part of in a way. But then this system cannot become, our motivation to live. I think the system should have simply serving us to move, but not we become the victims of the system. And this is, I think I remember the discussion in the financial crisis that in fact the real economy became the main driver, or I would say, serving the financial system, not the way around. And I think, when I look at the parallel, it really strikes me to see that we cannot reduce ourselves as just as actors in a financial system or just driven by the financial system. This is really the leap we want to do, and there should be actually a revolution for this, because it cannot be. So thank you again, Giovanni. I don't know if anybody from the Connected would like to make a comment. Najed.
Thank you, Rym, and hi everyone. I'm very happy to see all of you. Thank you very much, Martin, for your presentation and for sharing with us your ideas. So I would like to raise some points. Maybe one point is what we we observed for many centuries in our economies. It's developed or in developing countries. It's the economic rationality was developed without any consideration of nature or environment. And if we go back, we can think about Heidegger, the first philosopher who denounced modern technology as a way of extracting energy and profit from nature. And if we refer to Sponville, he said that nature is neither good nor bad. Nature has no conscience, no morals, and cares neither for us nor for ecology. So this means that we have attributed and we still attribute value to nature, value to environments. And this value comes from us, from people. And I think the adaptation or the change cannot be designed without thinking about an innovative value system. So what do you think about the recognition of a subjective or objective value given to the nature, to environment? Thank you.
Thank you, Najit. I will take a few questions and then I give you back the floor, Martin. I see Carlo hand. Carlo, please.
Yes, I've put my question also in the chat, because actually when you have shown your relativity theory of money, Martin, came to my mind the quantum economics book from David Orrell, which tells that actually money is a quantum system, and I think it is a very interesting theory, and I think also that partially is complementary or similar, at least in terms of giving a positive value to the going the direction of positive money creation more than debt based systems. So I want just to know from you if you know that theory, and if you can just tell if there is some relation of your own work. What do you think?
Thank you, Carlo. Martin, to you.
Yeah. So first of all, I want to really thank Giovanni for his very eloquent speech and his way of describing my work, which I found really fascinating and interesting. So it really shows how well he understood the book, and it's really pleasing to me. So on the question of valuing nature, well, I'll be a bit provocative. So in many cases, we're saying humans do this to nature, or humans have done that. We're actually nature doing something to itself. We're absolutely not outside of nature. Now, I just like you to run a few simulations in your mind. In my view, we have been created purposefully by nature for a reason. That's the whole idea of my book. So like, just try to imagine what planet Earth is, and just remove all of humanity and just, paint the story of Earth without humans. So, plants grow, animals reproduce, everything is balanced, ecosystems balance naturally. We know that ecosystems balance naturally if we leave them alone. And then along comes an asteroid, or comes, a reversal of the magnetic poles, or comes along, the Earth goes into a section of the galaxy where there is going to be a massive glaciation period or something like snowball Earth or whatever. 90% of all life dies, and then you repeat. And this story goes nowhere, basically. It's a pointless cycle. And if you see anything in the trend of the universe, it's that complexity increases over time. You have new elements that appear. Otherwise, we'd still be just big balls of gas, basically, and that's it. Or, dispersed gas uniformly across the universe. But that's not what the universe does. If you look at our reality, we had solar systems emerge, then you had planets, then you had life, then you have us. So obviously it's going somewhere. And so why would Mother Earth or this planet bother to create these terrible beings like human beings? Well, obviously, if you put humans in the equation, we can now consciously decide to defend nature. So it's like nature defending itself. But humans are a double-edged sword. We have the power to deflect an asteroid. We have the power to understand ecosystems and therefore consciously rehabilitate them in a matter of decades when left to their own devices, it would take millions of years or thousands of years for ecosystems to balance. But we also have the power to destroy ecosystems in a matter of years, just dropping a few bombs here and there, whatever. And it's just a choice now to fulfill the purpose or the role that we are meant to fill, which is protect life, protect this planet consciously. So it's nature having a consciousness of its own. But obviously nature has all sides. It is suicidal at the same time as it is giving life. And so it's our humanity is tinkering now on that edge of, okay, who are we? Why are we here? But that's why we're here in the first place, because without us, this planet is just an unconscious ball of nature that just is devoid of any protection against outside mechanisms and things that is outside of its control. It's like your immune system. Your immune system, if it attacks your own body, you would die within a matter of days. But you're not going to say, oh, I'm going to get rid of this very dangerous system. No, no, no. When it acts according to what it's supposed to do, it is very good, very, very good. And it can maintain you alive for a lot of years. So I would say that actually it's just that we're not constantly aware of the role we're supposed to play, and that's what's most problematic. Not that, you know, we have to attribute more value to nature or whatever. We are nature. We are nature. We're part of nature. We're here for that specific purpose. Now, with regards to the quantum economy comment, I totally subscribe to that kind of view where basically, you know, your house doesn't have any value until the moment that it's bought by someone. I mean, humans do use money as a kind of voting mechanism for determining what has value for them. It's just an outer tool for doing that. And it has emerged simply because coordinating a tribe of 100 people, you can kind of have another way of deciding where you draw your human kind of power or potential in one direction. Let's go hunting, let's build this, let's do that. When you have 1 million people that try to coordinate their actions, you have to have some kind of tool. Now you could have a time-based currency, and a time-based currency to me is a little less quantum because it's based on like human time, your actual time of physical work. Whereas debt money, because it's an abstract numeric value, which inherently you could work for like 1 hour as a top lawyer and reimburse your debt within a few days, or you could work for your whole life as a cleaning lady and never have your debt repaid for the same amount. So it is a kind of a tool for giving spontaneously value to something that doesn't have any value in the first place. I totally subscribe to that. I've never heard of it, but I think it's really going in the same direction. And that, by the way, reinforces my point of we're not doing any of this by chance. It's something that's planted, a seed that's planted in us, and it will emerge as different forms. It will emerge as quantum economy theory. It will emerge as the relative theory of money. But ultimately, to me, we're just exteriorizing a kind of a wisdom that is within us, and that we're just giving a human form to on the outside that is more complex.
Thank you, Martin. I look at my colleagues here in EMEA. Do you have any questions, comments to Martin based on what you heard?
Well, I have actually some comments. Well, first of all, thank you for your presentation, and I will oh, sorry. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. I can.
Okay. Sorry. First of all, thank you for your presentation, and I look forward to take a look at the book. Actually, also because I mean it was quite complex to follow everything. I think you explain a lot of different things, and I'm a little bit confused about everything right now. So I have to like stay a while and rethink about everything. But some comments that I have here is that, well, first of all, I'm quite now, I found myself into the debate between, for example, ecological economics and environmental economics, you know? And basically, the two theories are quite fighting each other, basically because of the focus on whether the system should change and to what extent the system should change, in the sense that ecological economics say that the other model that we are developing now still are still based on a capitalistic view of our socioeconomic system, and still, so since we are still anchored in a way in the capitalistic way of thinking about the socioeconomic system, we cannot go beyond and further. So my question is, what do you think about it, and to what extent what you are trying to explain and suggest with this book, trying to think about the ecosystem and the body system applied to socioeconomic system should take into account the fact that we are still in a capitalistic way of thinking, and to what extent this could be a threat for really go beyond what we have right now. Thank you.
Okay, one question from here. I see the others. Who won? Okay, Yagame. You have another question from the team.
No, but hello. Thank you again for this sharing, presenting this book. It's very inspiring, and I mean a new way of thinking how money can be. But actually, my question is about inequality. I know that the theory explains that at the end of the day, we end up, if this type of money is applied, we end up with having less inequality in the society. And there is like theory about why inequality is sometimes good for the economy, because it creates surplus of capital in places, and that surplus of capital creates innovation, new technology, and so on. So I have heard like this theory that, I mean, many explain that this sometimes inequality is not that bad, you know, in terms that it creates it's like a fuel for moving forward, for innovation, and so on. This surplus of capital, and how it's going to happen in this theory, in your point of view. Thanks. Yeah.
Okay, 2 questions from the team. Martin.
Okay, so first, we're still in a capitalist system. Well, yes, I mean, you know, in these transitions, it's never this radical, you know, you don't never switch instantaneously from one to the other. And if it is instantaneous, it's usually pretty bad. I was talking about cutting the umbilical cord. It's actually quite a traumatic experience for many infants. And in my book, I talk about a lotus birth, which is basically where you leave the placenta attached, you let it dry naturally, which falls after about 5 days. And that's a much less abrupt transition for the baby from one kind of way of feeding or receiving energy to another. It gives the time for his lungs to form and all this stuff to stabilize. So it's not really that much of a problem. I think what's a problem nowadays is our self-hatred and our self-criticism and all the judgments, the judgments we have. So to give it metaphorically, it's as if a baby was feeling guilty for consuming its mother's blood and was squeezing the umbilical cord to, like, you know, make, you know, just not pumping so much blood from its mother. But that also delays its own kind of growth and impedes on the health of its cells, so it cannot reach maturity fast enough. So in other words, what I'm saying is, it's not like we should snap our fingers and stop consuming oil. But if we consume oil, then we have to use that energy to reach the stage where humanity develops alternative technologies and alternative sources of energy, and start behaving like a global collective organism harmoniously. And you can see that right now, it's like if the stomach was trying to digest the intestines. You know, with Russia attacking Ukraine, it's silly. When a country attacks another, from the perspective of a global collective organism, it's as if you had a war, an internal war between your organs. So we're not there yet. But if we use the existing energy sources for the purpose of the transition, that's a good use of it. You're talking about transition again. We know about like stranded assets. That's a big problem. How do you transition out of fossil fuels if the whole banking system collapses because it's so over leveraged with fossil fuels? Well, if you switch to something like the relative theory of money, where there is it's not dependent on this whole systems of very complex debts and all that stuff, then you can transition out much more easily, because now money creation is not via debt and via all these kind of systems. So, you know, it's just everything has to go at its own pace. Plus, humanity is not like one family, like one you lonely child. It's like we're a very numerous family where some people are still at the level of like a child, some are still babies, some are teenagers. But it's a whole process and it's happening. And it's just that now we have the choice of doing that consciously. We're not like advancing like a pinball, hitting the walls, advancing nonetheless, but hitting the walls. We can now actually know what we're doing thanks to this kind of frame of analysis. So I don't think it's a problem that we're still under capitalism. I think you can transition from one to the other, and that's what we should start reflecting on. And it's about using capitalism in the correct way to develop to the point where we don't need it anymore. Now, in terms of inequality and surplus of capital to invest, I totally agree. And in the relative theory of money, you have fresh new money that is injected into the economy, which corresponds to normally the growth of the monetary mass in a debt-based system, so just transposed to another way of functioning. But the existing monetary mass is still there. So that capital goes nowhere. That capital is still available for investment. And if you look at the Danish mortgage model, I think that is a very interesting way of reallocating excess capital. So what you do is you just create bonds that people can buy, and they give you a certain yield, and those bonds can then serve to either for a mortgage or for anything else. It can be just like state bonds. And that's one way of doing it to allocate surplus capital. So once people know that if they just have their money sit on their account, it does nothing, it actually devalues and they're pulled towards the mean in terms of their wealth, they may want to invest that money rather than sit on it or stuff it under a mattress. So it's also this whole logic of people being more proactive in investing. Plus, I wouldn't also underestimate the psychological effect of knowing that you'll receive daily your universal dividend. It's like this Maslow kind of pyramid. Once you're no longer afraid for your survival, you know that you can actually at least buy some food every day to sustain yourself. That also triggers a kind of a different mentality change in people. Whereas in our current system, we're always scared that we're going to lose our job, we're going to lose that. And that creates certain behaviors in humans as well. That distorts humans in a certain direction. So I don't think that we're going to get rid of surplus capital at all. I just think that it will flow more naturally and that it will be circular, basically because the people that buy those bonds are, in the case of the mortgage, Danish mortgage model, and I encourage you to look at that, it's actually pension funds sometimes or individual citizens that buy these bonds. So citizens finance the credits, and so they get a return on the interest and not the banks, or the banks only get a tiny marginal fraction of that. But push that even further, you can see a decentralized finance kind of organized around that kind of logic, where people just pool their crypto asset universal dividend and lend it into the economy, and then they get the proceeds or the returns without an intermediary like banks that is sucking in all the wealth. And that's also very possible in the future.
Thank you, Martin. So my last question to you before closing this launch of your book, what is your next works? Are you going to continue making this type of reflections and going forward with it, or what is your plans going forward?
Well, that's the toughest question you've asked me all evening. No, I mean, the book has just been published, so obviously I'm going to try to do more of these presentations because there's just much to talk about, and you can go and I could make this into a 2-hour presentation easily. So there's just a lot to say on the basis of that book. I have plans for other books and other contents that is a bit more, how should I say, esoteric, let's say, or even higher up in terms of like trying to understand what are we doing here in the end, because one of the main purposes of this book is to give a meaning to what we're doing here on the planet and not advancing blindly thinking there's no plan. It's to go delve even deeper into this whole idea of meaning. But other than that, I'm also working on the metaverse because I'm a PhD student at University College Dublin, and my topic is on the metaverse. That's also a huge kind of field of work because of, well, there's dangers, there's potentials for what can be achieved with the metaverse. even in terms of financial system also, because I envisage metaverse as being as a virtual space for experimentation. And one of the areas of experimentation is obviously testing different ways of finance and monetary systems. And video games have been used for that already. I mean, you have video games with certain financial systems that are disconnected from this reality for testing how people would react to those kind of systems. So it can be a way of iterating and trying things without having to try it in real life and realize it was a bad idea, and then having very physical and material downfalls to deal with. So yeah, I mean, I'll continue working on the contents of the book, transforming it into various presentations, and hopefully give more of these very enlightening talks with people like you.
Thank you very much, Martin. That was again very inspiring, and we wish you all the luck for your research and your PhD. Of course, we will be very open to collaborate with you. We are working on creativity and digitalization. Perhaps this is something that could be interesting for you going forward, and also flourishing, because as economists, we are also trying to look at other models to flourishing our economies. And then trying to also regenerate. And this is something that Carlo and I are trying to work on, with Giovanni on well-being, with Nejed trying really to think about safety nets. And even as economists, we are trying to think beyond the box, as we call it, whatever box it is. It means that we have already seen that there is a box, that we need to exit from it to really respond to our societal challenges. Again, thank you very much for the time and sharing this insightful presentation with us, and the conclusions of your book. I think this is a journey that you will continue, I assume, and then we'll be very happy to listen to you in the future on how your, I would say, works are evolving. I would like to thank Giovanni for the great presentation and discussion as always, Carlo and Nejed for being with us. Nejed, hope to see you tomorrow. Carlo, good recovery. And then I would like to thank all the team here. And Martin, your presentation and this session will be shared on our social media. And then to ensure that other people also are listening to it. Thank you very much again, and I hope to see you soon.
Thank you very much for the invitation, and good luck with the two-day conference coming up. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Okay.